The first 3 seconds were enough to ignite the whole range. "Stay in the kitchen, sweetheart." The words cracked across the formation like a whip. They came from Colonel Victor Hale, Iron Viper, the man who'd turned humiliation into an art form. His voice carried over 60 soldiers assembled under the Nevada Sun Rangers. Marine Raiders, Green Berets, all gathered at Fort Blackthorn's long-range complex. A ripple of laughter broke loose. Boots shifted, shoulders leaned. Eyes found the lone figure standing off to one side. Captain Aria Donovan, 32, hair bound tight, Barrett MRAD, .338 slung across her back. She didn't smile, didn't scowl. She simply let the insult hang, carried by the desert wind like dust. Hale let the silence stretch, feeding off the smirks and muttered jokes. At 51, every medal polished, every crease knife sharp, his reputation as a sniper instructor was carved into doctrine. Nobody corrected Colonel Hale, no. Nobody questioned his charts, his equations, his word, and certainly not a woman with no West Point pedigree. No articles published, no lineage of command. He turned, sweeping the formation before snapping his gaze back to her. "This isn't the kitchen. Captain, out here. Steel and math decide who goes home." Laughter cracked louder. Someone coughed into his fist to hide the grin. Arya adjusted her sling and lowered her gaze to the sand. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Every soldier there had already judged her until the weapon came out. "Wait. Where are you tuning in from? Soldier, drop your city in the comments, and if you're new to the unit, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next mission." The Barrett MRAD unfolded in her hands, desert light catching the scarred Cerakote finish. It wasn't parade ground clean, it was field-aged, edges worn smooth from deployments. A tool, not a trophy. She laid it across the mat with the same calm she'd once used to field dress elk in Montana winters. The same deliberate grace she carried through firefights in valleys none of these men had ever seen. A few of the younger Marines traded uneasy looks, even through the mockery. Something in her composure gnawed at their certainty. Hale barked. "Range is live. Let's see if you even belong here." The words echoed downrange, bouncing against steel frames. Heat shimmered off the desert floor, mirages twisting the horizon. The Black Hawk idling on the pad rattled the air. Rotor wash, carrying grit across the line. Arya lowered herself prone, breath steady, scope adjusted, around her. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for failure. That was how these contests always ended: a stumble, a laugh, another cautionary tale about why outsiders didn't belong in Hale's house. But when her cheek settled against the stock, when her finger brushed the trigger guard, the mood shifted. Something in her stillness unsettled them more than bravado ever could. The first shot hadn't left the barrel yet, but every man knew the real lesson was about to begin. Before she was Captain Donovan, they called her Cold Shot. The name didn't come from ribbons or schools. It was born on a ridge in Montana, where storms taught lessons harsher than any instructor ever could. Arya Donovan grew up where winters chewed through bone and summers baked the ridges bare. Her father hunted to put meat on the table, and from him she learned to measure distance by how the trees bent in the wind, to read mirage shimmer and gusts as if they were words in a book. By 12, she had dropped her first elk at 600 yards. By 15, she was guiding men twice her age through blizzards they weren't ready for. Precision wasn't talent. It was discipline carved by silence and cold. The army wasn't in her plan until the valley took someone from her. Corporal Jamie Vance, the boy she'd grown up with, deployed to Afghanistan's Korengal Valley. Root Copperhead, an IED. He never made it back. The obituary was short, the kind you could miss in the back of a paper. But to Arya, it was the breaking point. 2 weeks later, at 25. She signed enlistment papers. Ranger school nearly broke her body. but not her resolve. She wasn't the fastest or the loudest, but she was the one who didn't waste rounds on the range. Instructors learned not to bet against her. Every shot bent wind and terrain into obedience. Her first combat deployment sent her to the same valley that had claimed Jamie, Korengal. Even Black Hawk pilots cursed it as the Valley of Death. On her third patrol, she spotted a man kneeling in dust, wires in his hands. 800 meters. Dawn breaking. Thermals clawing at her scope. She whispered Jamie's name, exhaled, and pressed the trigger. The convoy rolled on, never knowing how close it had come. One save became 3. 3 became 20. She didn't count them as kills. She counted the squads that returned, the convoys that made it home. By the time she rotated stateside, whispers of cold shot followed her into every briefing room. Now Fort Blackthorn had brought her in under the sterile title of evaluator, but the men around her rangers, raiders, seasoned instructors saw only a woman in pressed fatigues. Late to the game. To them she was just another outsider with paperwork. Yet here she lay, Barrett MRAD snug against her shoulder, Nevada dust grinding into her elbows. 60 men stood behind her, waiting for the mistake they could laugh at for years. Colonel Hale's smirk cut across the line like a razor. Arya adjusted her scope, breath steady. She didn't think of Hale. She thought of Jamie, and the promise she carried into every trigger pull. One more comes home. Her finger found the trigger, and the desert braced for proof. The Nevada sun pressed against Fort Blackthorn's range, heat rippling across the valley. 60 men, 36 instructors, and 24 operators stood in silence as Colonel Victor Hale's smirk cut through the dust. 1,000 meters. Show us you belong. Sweetheart? Arya Donovan dropped prone, Barrett MRAD snug against her shoulder. Breath slowed. The crowd faded. One more comes home. The trigger broke steel rang. Again. 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 5 shots. 5 perfect hits. A ripple cut through the formation. Smirks dimmed. A ranger muttered. 5 for 5. Hale's jaw tightened. Beginner's luck. 1350. Dinner plates. Most don't clear 3. Far downrange. The targets shimmered in the mirage. No bigger than mess trays. A 14-knot crosswind clawed across the valley. Arya adjusted by instinct. Montana ridges had taught her to read shimmer and grass twitch better than any issued meter. First clang, second clang, third clang, fourth dust puff, just wide. A flicker of laughter. 5th clang. 4 of 5, better than most, but not flawless. Hale pounced. See, even luck runs out. The murmurs returned heavier now, edged with doubt. 1600. Hale snapped. Stacked targets. Prove it. At the far end. Steel blurred with a silhouette behind it. Few men hit clean at that distance. Arya dug deeper into the grit. Sweat stung her eyes. Dust clung to her lips. First round miss. Gasps. Second graze. No ring. Heads shook. She closed her eyes. Montana winters. Jamie's name. One more comes home. 3rd clang. 4th clang. 5th impact. The round punched through steel and drove into the silhouette beyond. The range erupted gasps. Curses. Disbelief. A shot through 2 targets at 1600 meters. Hale's smirk cracked. His voice wavered. One shot doesn't make a legend. But no one looked at him. Every eye locked on Aria Donovan, the woman they had mocked minutes before. Jaw tight, Hale stepped forward and lifted her rifle. His fingers found the magazine release. Click! The mag slid free. Sunlight struck the underside rows of tallies carved deep. A whisper carried through the ranks. Voice shaking. There's more than 100. Colonel Victor Hale bent down, dust crunching under his boots as he lifted the Barrett MRAD from the mat. The rifle felt heavier than it should have. as if the silence around him had poured into the steel. He turned it over in his hands with the practiced air of an instructor ready to expose a flaw. The crowd pressed in, a semicircle of rangers, raiders, and Green Berets leaning closer. The colonel worked the magazine release with a metallic click. The mag slid free, dropping neatly into his palm. At first, it looked ordinary. Tan cerakote scratched from deployments, edges worn smooth. But then sunlight struck the underside. Dozens of shallow lines glared back at him. Rows of 5, carved with the precision of a surgeon's hand, etched so deep they had survived years of sand, rain, and recoil. Hale blinked once, then again, each breath shorter than the last. The murmurs began. Soldiers on the fringe craned their necks, eyes widening as they caught sight of the marks. One ranger in the second row whispered the count under his breath, fingers twitching with each tally. 20, 40, 70. His voice cracked as he reached the final row. 117. The words carried across the range like a detonation. Every chuckle, every smirk that had followed the word sweetheart earlier, dissolved into silence so thick it pressed on the skin. Hale's hand froze. His lips parted. But no words came. He had spent decades teaching theory, publishing charts and ballistics tables, and here, etched on the bottom of a magazine plate, was a record of missions he couldn't even imagine. One of the younger Marines broke the silence, voice shaking. "Sir, that's more than anyone in this division." Hale's head turned sharply, as if to silence him, but the truth was already in the open. The colonel finally looked at Arya. Her expression hadn't changed. Calm, steady. The same unreadable mask she had worn since stepping onto the line. "What do they mean?" he demanded, though his voice was lower now, stripped of its earlier swagger. Arya's reply was quiet, but it carried across the formation with the weight of a rifle report. "They're not kills, Colonel. They're reminders. Each one is a convoy that made it home." The words rippled through the crowd. Every man there had ridden in a convoy, waited for the crack of an unseen rifle to cut down the ambush before it reached them. They knew what she meant. Hale set the magazine down on the bench as if it might burn through his gloves. His smirk was gone. For the first time, his eyes carried something foreign respect, or at least the shadow of it. Around them, the instructors shifted uncomfortably. For years, Hale's word had been gospel, but now, standing in the Nevada dust, it was Aria Donovan who had rewritten the lesson. The colonel cleared his throat. His command voice returned, but it trembled on the edges. "All instructors forward. You will observe Captain Donovan's methods. Manuals don't cover what she just showed us." A ripple of boots moved. 39 of the Army's finest closed in, notebooks and skepticism in hand. Arya laid the rifle back on the mat, sliding the magazine into place with a firm, final click. "Lesson 1, she said evenly, shooting through rotor wash. The Black Hawk on the pad began to spool up, rotors chopping the desert air into chaos. Dust swirled. Soldiers shielded their eyes. Arya didn't flinch. The Black Hawk's rotors shredded the desert air, dust whipping into the eyes and throats of the cadre pressed along the firing line. Colonel Hale's bark cut through the roar. "Watch closely. Manuals don't teach this." Arya Donovan dropped prone, Barrett snug in her shoulder. The downdraft turned the range into chaos gusts, yanking at uniforms, grit grinding between teeth. Soldiers muttered about impossible conditions. She steadied her scope, adjusted her hold, and broke the shot. Steel rang across the valley. Gasps followed, then silence. Calmly, she explained what none of their textbooks covered: how rotor wash carved vacuums, how to read the vortex like mirage shimmer, how to fight fatigue when the body begged to quit. Each detail landed heavier than a bullet in the days that followed. Hale pulled his senior instructors forward. Men who had once smirked at the word sweetheart now scribbled notes, listening as if every sentence might decide a future patrol's survival, piece by piece. The tone of Fort Blackthorn shifted, but Arya never asked for credit. While others traded stories in the mess, she sat alone, wiping dust from the Barrett, her thumb brushing the base plate etched with 117 lines. Not trophies, not kills, reminders of lives brought home. On the final day, Hale called her forward. No sarcasm this time, only the weight of respect. He placed a citation in her hand. She slipped it into her pocket without looking. Recognition was never the mission. One young ranger lingered after the others. He had been loudest in the laughter on day one. Now his voice was quiet. "Captain Donovan, what do you call what you do?" Her eyes stayed on the horizon. Voice steady. "I call it carrying the burden so someone else doesn't have to." The ranger nodded, as though seeing her for the first time. Arya packed her rifle, magazine locked with a final click, and walked toward the waiting transport. She never looked back. Some heroes don't carve their names in stone. They etch them in silence, in the lives saved rather than the shots fired. And sometimes, the loudest truth on the battlefield is the one spoken without words.